So what's next? Now you have a pile of papers or a pile of PDFs that have notes and scribbles and highlights on them. What do you do with them now? Well, I would create an outline. So I always use Word for this. Now, I think you can use Google Docs, and there's probably others, if you're using something else too. I'm going to show you how to use Word. I still think Word is the best way to work for me. It still has a few functions that Google Docs, as far as I can tell, doesn't have. So I create a Word document and I write headings with big, broad topics. What are the big themes or big ideas that I'm finding? And then under each of those themes, I start to kind of enter the notes and the quotes from my reading. So I'll open up a PDF that I've read and I'll go through and I'll say, well, here's something that I've highlighted. Where would this highlight go? And I might copy it and I'll paste it into my outline and I'll put it under the heading that I think makes most sense. And then of course, as I copy and paste it under the heading that makes most sense, I'm going to put quotation marks around it so that I'm clear that it's not my words. I've taken it from the article. And I'm going to put the reference, the author and the year and the page number right after it straight away so that I don't have to, 2 weeks later, go back and chase and find where did I get this quote from. I'm going to do it straight away. So I go through the article and I copy and paste the notes and the quotes that I find interesting and put them under different headings. And I start to make new headings, and I might even start to make subheadings underneath the bigger headings. And so that I end up with an outline with lots of different points and quotes and bullet points underneath. Then what I do is I rearrange my headings. So I might decide that some of my headings should be higher up in the order, or that maybe I can merge some headings, or maybe some of my headings I need to split, or maybe I need to add some subheadings. And so I'm really thinking about the structure of the information that I want to provide. What's the best way? What makes the most sense in terms of headings and the ideas that I want to include from the literature that I've read? Then I go through and I start to write out the notes and the quotes into paragraphs. And we'll cover that in just a minute. But here's an example of how I use Word with the headings. So I'm actually going to show you two documents. This is a fake outline that I've created for the purpose of this video. We'll see it later. But here's a heading, there's definitions, and then maybe I've read some things that are about the definitions of baby boomers, which is something I'm going to be researching. Maybe I find some other information on demographics. And so I can use these headings to order my work. And the way that I do this, so let's say maybe I want to add a new heading. So let's say, types of destinations perhaps. So maybe I do some reading and I find, that baby boomers like some types of destinations over others. So what I can do is I'm going to use this tool up here, which is the styles. And so normally when I type, it's just going to be normal, just normal text. But if I click heading 1, then it changes it into the same font, into the prefixed font that I've assigned to heading 1. And it also shows up in my navigation tool over here. So like if I just turn that back to normal, you'll see it disappears over here. But if I turn it to heading 1, then it shows up over here. And so now when I get a big document, I can actually just see the headings of the main points that I've made. And it shows me the structure of the arguments I want to make. Now, maybe I start putting in more notes and more notes. And I figured, you know what, types of destinations, that's actually more narrow than, say, leisure habits. So I'm going to move types of destinations underneath leisure habits because leisure is bigger than travel. Travel is a part of leisure. So maybe I want to do leisure first because it makes more sense to do the big, broader topics first. So what I can do in Word, and I can't do this in Google Docs, I don't think, is I can click on this and I can drag it underneath. And it actually moves that section and everything that's under that section into the different order. Let me show you on a different document. So this is actually a paper that I've wrote. So it's 32 pages, it's pretty big. And so here you can see all of the headings that I've got. So at a glance, I can see, what's the main structure of the paper. And also then I'm using subheadings, and the subheadings, they should be of consistent scale of order. So what do I mean? Here's my literature review. So that's my main heading because it's the part of the paper, it's the literature review. But then underneath, I've got two sections. And one section is on hosting friends and relatives. So it's a review of literature on hosting friends and relatives, a topic you don't need to worry about. And then I've got a different section that's on social and cultural capitals. And again, that's not a topic you need to worry about, but these are two topics that are of an equal scale of importance. They are different from each other, so that's why they are not in the same heading or the same subheading, but they're of the same level. They're not as big as Lit Review, so that's why they're not heading 1, they're heading 2, but they're different from each other, and so it makes sense to have them as separate as heading 2s. And so I sometimes find that really useful when I'm just trying to skim through my own work and organize it to see, use different colors or different font sizes to know, just to be able to navigate my own document a little bit more simply. The other really cool thing about headings is the table of contents. So I can create a table of contents. So I can go over here and it's references and table of contents, and then there's a couple of different options. I can just go over here, and then there is my table of contents that's based upon my headings and what page numbers they're at. And there's a few different options you can play around. But of course, if you change something, you have to remember, let's just say, let's move the introduction all the way down a couple of pages. So it doesn't change automatically. You have to right click and update field, and you can either update the entire table, so that will change if you've changed the heading titles themselves. But if you've only changed the page numbers, you can just click this and then it updates over here too. So that's pretty useful. And so to think about the order of my headings and the order of the things that I want to include in my Lit Review, I'm really going to think about finding the different categories of topics that I want to talk about. And then within those categories, I want to go from broad to narrow. And so I'm going to start with some broad overall claims, maybe some definitions, and the really big kind of introduction stuff. Maybe it's how many million people do this thing, or right, the kind of the big broad claims and definitions that I want to include and of the topic I want to talk about. Then I'm going to be more specific. So maybe it's, if I'm talking about festivals and tourism in Toronto, maybe I start off by saying, in Canada, there are 20,000 festivals and they attract 20 million people a year, or whatever it is, right? And then I become a bit more narrow. When we look at Toronto specifically, we can see that there are 200 festivals, whatever it is. And so we're showing that this is a really big topic globally, overall, whether it's, just at that bigger level. So it's a useful topic. But now we're going to narrow down a bit. And within there, we're also going to define perhaps what a festival means, if that's what we're looking at. What is a festival? How do we actually define what a festival is? What does the literature say is a festival? So we're starting with that big stuff, and then we're narrowing down to more specifics. And again, we just narrow down and narrow down. And what we can do is we can present the topics of consistent levels of scale, right? So for example, in my paper, I showed you hosting friends and relatives and social and cultural capitals. Again, you don't need to worry about the topics, but they're of a consistent, similar scale. So it's not that one is bigger or broader or more narrower than the other. But what we can do is we can say, here are the two topics. And now let's look at those two topics in relation to my very specific interest. And so we can get even more narrow and say, well, we know this about this and we know that about that. Now let's apply, that knowledge and look at this specific thing. Why is it interesting to look at this and this together in this way? So now I've ordered my Lit Review and I've got some structure and I've got some subheadings, and I can see the flow of points that I want to make, but I've still got just copy and paste and bullet points and all that kind of stuff underneath each of the headings. So now I go back to the headings and I start to write out the notes that I've prepared. So I might keep a couple of direct quotes. And again, direct quotes are excellent for definitions and just occasionally when something is just written really, really well. So that's the only time we're going to use direct quotes. If I use a direct quote, if I keep a direct quote, I'm going to put the quotation marks around it. I'm going to put the author and the year, and if it's a book or an article, the page number as well. I'm going to paraphrase, and paraphrasing is the best thing that you can do. And paraphrasing is where you can summarize the points that are being made in your own words. And so this is where you might have 3 or 4 different bullet points from different things that you've read, but it's actually the same general point that they're making. And so you can write that same general point in your own words and then include the references for that 1, 2, or 3 articles afterwards. And so just to demonstrate that, this top one here is a paraphrasing a point that this particular article made. And then this point here is actually summarizing and synthesizing information that I took from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different articles. So these were all points that in my outline were all separate points from the different articles. And I realized that I could actually group them together and kind of create this list and say, look, here's the big main point and here's all the different articles where I got it from. And so that demonstrates to the reader that I have read a lot, that I've researched this, that I'm familiar with the topics, and here's a summary of some of those big key issues that are consistent or relevant to the topic that I'm researching right now. So that's what I want you to do. Paraphrase as much as possible.